Okay, so I'd now like to introduce Melanie Isaacs. Melanie co-founded and is director of the registered charity Team Dog, focusing on pet owner support, progressive shelter strategies and advocacy work. She's spent over 6 years working in animal management in New South Wales and holds a Cert 3 in dog behaviour and training. Melanie attended internships with various well-respected organisations in the USA in 2013 and 2014 to gain an insight into pet retention programs, focusing on keeping pets with their families and preventing surrenders. Her passion lies with open-minded and caring approaches to pet owner interactions and positive legislative reform. Please welcome Melanie to the stage.
Told to be careful about the cables, but I'm really good at falling over things, so apologies if it happens. Hello, I am very excited to talk to you guys about the barriers to reclaims today. It's a bit different from the medical side of things, which has been really fascinating, but it's something I'm very, very passionate about, and I love the angle of getting to zero this year. I'm coming at it, I guess, from both the animal management, as you heard, and the welfare sphere, so I've sort of seen both sides of it, and I think that there's a lot of work that can be done in local government as well as animal welfare. Even the most well-resourced shelters with the greatest programs will eventually hit a point where adoptions that they're doing each year aren't going to increase any further. So by focusing on getting more pets home so that they never need adoption in the first place, we'll increase our live release rates, reduce our costs, and also our shelter population. Firstly, a little bit, if you haven't heard of who we are, Team Dog, I'm going to move that. We're a registered charity operating out of Sydney, and we provide assistance within New South Wales. We were established in August 2013, and most of our work is around pet owner support and advocacy, particularly around legislation. And the bulk of our pet owner support over the years has been helping pet owners reclaim their pets from the pound when they're faced with fees that they're struggling to afford. You'll see a lot of photos throughout the presentation, which I don't have time to go into each story, obviously, but suffice to say they're all clients that we've either worked through helping them reclaim their pets from the pound or through our free and pay what you can microchipping events. So according to the last available statistics that I found in New South Wales, only about 43% of dogs and 3% of cats are being reclaimed from the shelters. Situation appears to be quite similar around the country, with tens of thousands of animals being found new homes or sadly euthanased each year. Even the most well-resourced shelters, when they're taking strays, are unlikely to place more than 40% of their incoming animals, which is really limiting the live release options for animals in their care. Traditionally, a lot of animal welfare and management has largely believed that those animals who don't go home were not wanted or valued by their former owners. Certainly, in some cases, that can be true, but a closer look shows that many pet owners struggle with significant barriers when attempting to reclaim their loved pets. A nice example is that at the Marin Humane Society in California, a focused program on increasing reclaims resulted in a boost in their reclaim rate of 30% of dogs and 32% of cats. So in 2012, their rate was actually 92% of dogs went home and 39% of cats did, which is phenomenal. So it's one of the many shelters across the US that are really focusing on this reclaim idea, and it's getting great results. So, historically, enforcement has been considered the primary purpose of the ranger or animal control officer role in Australia and certainly worldwide as well. Their scope is to simply fulfil the legislative obligations of local government. So penalties, orders, seizures, euthanasias sometimes, and basically keeping animals for their minimum hold. Officers typically only deal with the comparatively very small percentage of dog owners who have breached legislation or caused an issue in the community. So for many, their view of pets and pet owners can be skewed very much towards the negative. Owners who have their pets impounded or who have breached legislation in some way are sometimes considered irresponsible and unworthy of owning that pet. Punishment is considered the best or even the only way to achieve compliance in the community. Thankfully, over time this is changing at various councils throughout the country, but it's still an extremely common attitude to come across. Officers issue penalties without assistance or information to help a pet owner improve, and the reclaim of impounded dogs is typically very costly and difficult, which is presumably to deter a pet owner from allowing further escapes. As an alternative, what if animal management officers worked collaboratively with the community, sharing information and giving support as a primary means of achieving legislative requirements? What if they considered those who have come across their radar due to some sort of problem or breach to be simply showing that they just need a little bit of extra help or to help them do better? What if we prioritise assistance first and reserve punishment for those few who continue to do the wrong thing? There's many areas that could be areas where change could be implemented to achieve that, but today I'll be mostly focusing on this idea of increasing reclaims. I'm going to be providing some practical steps that local government pounds and contracted shelters can take to get pets home and help them stay there. So firstly, as simple as it sounds, there's plenty we should be doing to just make sure pet owners actually know that we have their pet. Firstly, field officers need to be really well equipped with a working microchip scanner and be scanning every single pet where they are found. They should be able to access the microchip information in the field, either through technology that they've got with them, iPads, phones, or even if just a phone call back to someone at the office who's in front of a computer. Pets that are registered and chipped, take them home. Take them straight home. If you can get in contact with the owner, if you know where they live, if you can go and bang on the door, if you can chuck them in the yard and secure it, if it's just that a gate was open, do that. Keep them out of the shelter. Sometimes you're chronic nuisance animals, if you've tried your education and assistance and you're not getting anywhere, okay, you may have to consider impounding some of those animals, but still consider whether there's an alternative. If the animal is chipped but the details are out of date, we all know how common that is. I loved to try ringing around all my local vets and quoting the chip number, is this pet one of your pets? And a good percentage of the time it is, and they can give me the updated information and then I can get that pet home. An alternative too, have a couple of just dog crates set up at your office. So if you pick up an animal at 9 a.m. and it's got a chip, it's out of date, but it's a pretty loved pet and you're thinking someone's going to be looking for it, if you can hold that animal at the office for a few hours in the hope that someone calls, again, a lot of the time you'll get it home without actually having to take it to the shelter. If it is taken to the shelter, all right, you need really good protocols for your chips. So ensure that you're doing multiple chip scans, ideally with multiple scanners. Have a dummy microchip that you can test your chip scanner against to make sure it is actually working, because they do just sometimes randomly fail. And you should be making sure that really good, clear, bright photographs are taken on impound and listed online that day on the shelter website and any social media pages. That's the ideal. You should ideally, if you can, have your own Lost and Found Facebook page. I love this example here from Knox Council I'm pretty sure they're in Victoria, there's a screen grab pictured here. This little lady had a heart condition and she had 257 shares and she was found by her owner. I think the picture could be a little bit clearer, but overall, that's a great post that'll go a long way to getting a pet home. Ensure you're cross-checking the animals coming to you against lost and found reports that you've received, posts on local Facebook pages, and even things like Gumtree. And I know everyone's thinking that's really time-consuming. We're local government, we don't have the time to do that, which is really legitimate in a lot of cases. So volunteers, you'd be really surprised how many people of their own volition already are volunteering their time on lost pet pages on Facebook. If you can get them into a volunteer for your shelter to spend an hour or two a day cross-checking the animals in your shelter against Gumtree listings, local Facebook pages, you're really going a long way to getting that pet home. Make sure that your staff are actually encouraging lost pet owners to email you a photograph. There's so many studies now available on the inaccuracy of visual breed identification. So I might see a lab cross, you might see a husky cross. A lot of times owners are actually ringing, describing that they have such and such cross dog, and you're saying we don't have that dog, when you really do. So if they can email you a photograph, that goes a long way as well. Definitely encourage people to attend the shelter and actually have a look, but I think it's pretty unrealistic to expect every single person with a missing pet to actually physically come to your shelter. Really, we should be trying to do everything that we can to assist them to find the pet without actually having to physically come there through all the other things we've just discussed. This is a cool little idea that I've seen, and I'd really love to see some councils in Australia using this idea of found dog posters. The Marin Humane Society I mentioned before do it, and I think a few other local governments throughout the US. Basically, the way it works is that the officer that collects the lost dog or cat has large fluoro found dog posters in the car, ready to go, with blank spaces for them to fill in the information about the animal they've actually found on that. And that's then posted on that spot. You leave it where you found the animal. We know local government has some issues with posters on poles and things like that, but if we can work with our bylaws and things to make an exception for our animal sheltering, it will be fantastic. Got to have large lettering, found dog. You want it to be seen when someone's driving past, when someone's walking the streets, and be really obvious. And I think a really cool idea to take it further could actually be officers having instant film cameras in the car with them. Snap a picture of the pet that you found, attach it to the poster, pop it in a plastic sleeve or something to make it a bit more weatherproof before you're putting it up. And my Googling tells me you can get an instant film camera for about $100, and the film can cost maybe $1.20 or less if you're buying in bulk per photograph. So generally quite affordable and a really good way to potentially get people to know that you have their pet. And, you know, obviously, again, it negates that inherent risk with breed guesses. I would say if you couldn't do the photographs, avoid putting breed guesses on that unless it's a really obvious breed with distinctive features. So if you pick up a dog that looks like a lab cross, I would be putting on there found medium size yellow dog with a short coat, because at the end of the day you might be thinking it's a lab cross and that owner thinks they have a husky cross. Either of you might be right or wrong, but you don't want that to be a barrier for someone to actually know that you have picked up their pet. You want to put on there the date, your department, and obviously the shelter it's gone to, and plenty of contact information. Okay, so you've done all of these things and the owner has found their pet at your shelter. Happy days. At this point, we would hope that the pet goes straight home, but we all know that in many cases this isn't happening. Cost is one of the biggest barriers to reclaims, with pet owners regularly struggling to come up with the fees set by councils and shelters, which are often in the hundreds. If you can't afford X, you can't afford a pet, is something that we do hear thrown around a lot in the animal industry, and I do include myself in that. I have said it before as well. I don't say it anymore, but it's a really common thing for us to think. Part of breaking down these barriers means abandoning these sorts of snap judgments and requires us to recognise that financial circumstances alone are not reliable indicators of the capacity to love and care for a companion animal. We all know the joy, companionship and positive physical and mental health benefits associated with pet ownership. Do we really want to live in a world where the love of a pet is only reserved for those that are wealthy enough? At the end of the day, as we've heard earlier today, people are going to own pets anyway. You're not going to stop them from being able to own that pet. So why not just help them to be a better pet owner with the pet that they have? There are a number of studies available on the topic, and they have found that there is no correlation between income and a pet owner's desire and commitment to provide necessary care to their pets. Additionally, surveys of homeless pet owners reveal a level of attachment to their pets that may actually be greater than reported by pet owners who live in traditional residences. And I'd say that dog on the streets of New York there is pretty well loved. I think that's obvious. So the love, care and commitment is there, but the real issue is that low-income pet owners and those in crisis may often face daunting obstacles to keeping their pet than those who may be more financially or socially secure. Keeping live release rates up means prioritising getting pets home, but there are of course running costs involved with having that pet at the shelter, and we have to be financially sustainable. What I would say is if you haven't already, it's worth actually doing the numbers for your shelter to see if it's a cost-effective exercise to hold a pet for the entire hold period and either adopt it out or put it to sleep, versus just waiving some of your fees at the start and actually just getting that pet home straight away. I'm going to run a few numbers as an example. Let's say it costs your shelter an average of $20 a day in food, housing and staff costs to care for that dog. Your minimum hold is 7 days, and it costs you about $10 in staff wages to process the release of that pet when it goes home. Let's say that you euthanize that dog at the end of the hold at a cost of $30. At this point, we're now at $180 for a 7-day hold, euthanasia and disposal. Maybe your shelter is doing great with adoptions and you hold animals past their due date. In that case, you'd run your stats and actually figure out what your average hold time is prior to adoption or euthanasia and start to factor that into the cost. I'm going to estimate a very conservative extra 7 days, with $30 cost in finding the adoptive home and processing the adoption. So that's giving us a cost of $310 to hold that pet and either adopt it out or euthanize it, or even more if your shelter's actually holding more than that 7 days past the due date. You'll note I'm not including the costs in actually getting that pet to the shelter. My reasoning is that, as far as I'm concerned, that the penalties that councils have at their disposal to issue to pet owners for escaping is going to more than cover that. So if you identify the owner and they reclaim their dog and it goes home, if you really feel it's necessary, you can issue that penalty after the fact, and it's not going to be a barrier to actually getting that pet go home in the first place. So looking at those costs, what happens if the owner contacts you on day 2 wanting to reclaim their pet and they're quoted an amount that they tell you that they're unable to afford? What are you going to do? Do you do what's currently typically done in Australia, stick to the quoted cost, and you're then, if we're only thinking about money, risking being out of pocket between minimum $180 or maybe over $300 if that pet isn't reclaimed due to the cost? Or do you reduce your fees down to the actual cost of $50, which most people are going to be able to pull together in some way or another and send the pet home that same day? I would argue a lot of the time it's going to cost you a lot less in the long run if you drop your fees and just send the pet home. It may even be worth your while to go lower than your actual costs or waive the fees completely. At least then you're only out of pocket $50 instead of the over $300 that you may end up with already. And that's not even taking into account the added benefits of a lower population of pets needing to be found homes, including things like disease control. And of course, higher live release rates. Covering some sheltering costs through fundraising is something that is really difficult for councils because obviously you're local government, so you can't take donations and fundraise. But I think there is an answer that's being trialled in a few different areas. Think about something like partnering with some of your local community and for them to start a Friends of group, Friends of your shelter, with the sole purpose of supporting the council to implement progressive programs. The not-for-profit volunteer group can then apply for fundraising authority and deductible gift recipient status if they want to, and gather donations that can then be provided to the council to cover things like fee waiving programs, facility upgrades, behaviourists, or any extraordinary vet work that may be required for animals. A nice example is the Friends of Wingecarribee Animal Shelter in New South Wales, or FOWAS. They have 150 registered members and they've been raising funds for the council shelter for the last 13 years through raffles, fundraising, projects, membership fees and donation tins around the local area. This council actually has really high live release rates and a really good relationship with their local community. So if you've got passionate animal lovers wanting to volunteer their time and skills to your shelter, this is a brilliant way to actually get some extra funds in the door to run some extra programs. There's other options worth considering when attempting to balance the cost to hold a pet versus waiving some fees and getting them home. Owners will ask for payment plans, but we do know that a lot of the time these aren't paid back, and our options and resources for pursuing them are limited. Most shelters don't offer them for this reason. One payment plan option that can be a little bit more reliable and could be used for your standard fees or even that $50 to cover your actual costs is the use of Centrepay. Centrepay is run by the Department of Human Resources, and if you are an approved business, your low-income clients can actually set up a payment plan where an agreed amount comes out of their Centrelink payment and directly to you every fortnight. Team Dog is actually a Centrepay approved business, and we went through the process of applying. I was told by the representative that most councils are actually already Centrepay approved businesses, which from talking to councils everywhere, I think that's something that's not known by the animal sheltering part of council, but it's often being used for things like rates. So I would say have a chat to your finance department and see maybe if you are a Centrepay approved business. She definitely confirmed that things like pound fees could be used, it could be part of the Centrepay program. It would just come under council services basically. It's not 100% foolproof. If their Centrelink payments stop, then so do your payments, and they can actually just choose to cancel the payment. There's a 99-cent transaction fee, which you do need to absorb for each payment that comes out. But we've been trialling it, Team Dog, we've been using Centrepay for about the last 6 months, and we've found that most pet owners don't cancel their payments. We have had one person that did though, so that is worth considering. But again, I would say if your experience is similar to what ours is, and most pet owners do, pay you back at a small amount over time, it's potentially really worth it to get those pets home. Another option, if the owner of an unvet-worked pet finds their pet at the end of the stray hold, it's just to offer the pet back to them as an adoption. Basically, the pet goes home to sex, microchipped, vaccinated, all the things that we want them to be done, and their pet goes back home to where it was originally going to be anyway. While cost is likely to be one of the biggest barriers pet owners face in the reclaim process, there may be others that are common throughout Australia. Location is a really big one. Older pounds and shelters are often located far away, near the tip, out of the outskirts of the council area, and can be really difficult for people to get to. There's often poor street visibility as well. And that can be a really big issue for large pounds that contract to many different municipalities. You know, if people need to travel an hour to come to your shelter to reclaim that pet, that's creating a really large barrier for them. Obviously, after the fact, these are things that are hard to deal with, but if you guys are actually looking for a new build for your shelter or considering taking on extra contracts, it's really worthwhile considering whether that's actually going to be in the best interests of your shelter and the animals in your community. Opening hours is a really big one. Throughout the country, they're typically during just standard business hours, sometimes limited or no opening times over the weekends as well. I've seen a lot of smaller rural pounds too, maybe only open for an hour or two in the afternoons, usually during school pickup time, and that can be really, really, really difficult for your pet owning community to actually come in and reclaim their pets from you. If you're only open between, 4 and 5 p.m. or 3 and 5 p.m. weekdays, you're at best maybe taking a little bit longer. You're maybe going to hold this pet for more days than you really need to before someone can actually get there to get it, or at worst, that pet's never going to go home at all. So I would say that if you are only able to be open for limited hours, 2 hours a day, make that between 5 and 7 or 4 and 6 or something. So it's actually after work time and you're giving people a chance to come to you, and at least trying to do a few hours on the weekend if you can't do a full day. A big one that we run into with Team Dog is the inability to take payment over the phone. Strangely, there seems to be a lot of council-run pounds that cannot take payment over the phone. So we would be ready and willing to pay this person's impound fees to get their pet home, and the council needed us to physically come into the shelter with a card. And we are, a group of small volunteers around Sydney, and we work, and, we just couldn't help those pet owners because we simply couldn't pay over the phone. So that happens whether it's with a place like Team Dog, or if a pet owner just has a family member or a friend who wants to pay for them. If that friend has to actually physically go with them as well, again, it's just one more huge barrier to getting that pet home when it really has an owner that wants it and loves it. The other one too that I've seen, mostly rurally, but it's not uncommon, is that the shelter itself has no payment processing facilities. So a pet owner is expected to go to the council chambers, which is often in the middle of the council area or in the city, make their payment, and then travel to the pound, which is at the other end of the council area near the tip, to collect their pet. A lot of people don't drive. A lot of people struggle to have access to cars. There's very rarely public transport out to those council pounds that are further out. So it's just a huge barrier for so many people that will mean that pet doesn't go home. A few proactive ways that you can boost your reclaims. I'm going to skip over these a little bit because I am going to start to run out of time, but host some regular free and pay what you can microchipping events. And this concept of free or pay what you can, I can say from Team Dog, we did free for a long time, but we're, small charity that is limited in funds. So we changed to a free or pay what you can model. That's how we advertised it, and we actually found that we made money off those events. So people had the opportunity, if they said to us, I'm sorry, we can't afford the microchip, no problems. You don't need to pay anything for it. But we just said to people, look, if you've got the ability to make a donation towards what you've received from us today, that would be wonderful. The vast majority at least paid the $5 that it cost us to put the microchip in their animal, but people were giving us $10, $20, $30 at a time. So the last 2-hour event, we made a couple of $100 to go back into our events in the future. If the pet isn't desexed, another big one that I'm not seeing being done very often, but if the pet's not desexed and your shelter does adoptions and your vet gives you a reduced rate for adoptions, say to the person, hey, look, do you want to desex your pet? Have that conversation that we've been hearing about, that positive conversation where you're just there to help them and support them and offer them some assistance, and offer to send them to your vet and send it home with a cheaper desexing rate. The cost that the vet's charging you is so much less than they'd pay. And certainly in New South Wales, where registration has to be paid before they go home, we often find that sending them home desexed, and if they can claim the pensioner rate for desexing, means that the pet can go home for exact same cost that it would cost for them to just register it as an entire dog and go home. So pet owners are jumping at that, but a lot of councils actually aren't offering it as an option. Okay, really quickly, because it's sort of the end of the afternoon, I want to do a little experiment, I guess, for everyone to have a think about not letting perfect being the enemy of good when it comes to pet owners. We've heard before, we've heard a lot about this today, about trying not to judge people and meet them where they're at. So I want to play a little game with you guys now to see, how many of us are perfect pet owners. I'm not, I'll say that up front. What I'm going to do is call out a series of really common requirements that many rescues and even some shelters have in order for a home to be considered suitable for adoption, but obviously we're thinking about it as in if we're going to help this person get their pet back home, if we're going to go over and above to get that pet back home. So I'm going to get everyone to stand up, and if you don't meet the requirement I call out, then you have to sit down. And be honest, because I'm saying up front I'm not a perfect pet owner. Okay, so I'm going to call a thing out. If you don't meet it, you have to sit down. You either own your own home or you have written permission for animals from your landlord. Okay. Cat owners, you contain your cats to your property at all times. Okay? And these are all really common things that we see as requirements for adoptions. Dog owners, you walk your dog every day for at least 45 minutes. I would sit down. Okay. Dog owners again, you have a fully fenced yard with at least 1.8 high metre fencing, or if you're rural, you've got a house yard or some way to contain the dog. Okay. At least someone in your household is sort of working part-time, or you don't have everyone in your household working full-time, so that the pet has some company during the day. It's not being left for long periods. Okay. Any kids in your house are over 10 years old? Okay. You've already got another dog or cat at home to keep this pet company. I'm seeing that a lot in adoption requirements. Yeah, okay. All pets currently in your home are desexed. What's happening at the front here? We've got all the perfect pet owners in the front. All pets currently in your home are up to date with their vaccines, worming and flea treatment. Yeah. Me too. Me too. I would have sat down about 5 times by now. You allow your animals to come inside the house.
Sorry, repeat that.
You allow your animals to come inside the house. Have we only got 2 left? 3. Who's 3? Oh, Joe. All right. We've only got 1 left. Let's see. You would be able to cover a standard on-the-spot emergency vet bill of, say, $2,000. All right. So in this room of, I can't estimate numbers at all, so I'm not going to guess, but in this room of however you guys could sit down. Thank you, perfect pet owners. But that's kind of telling, right? Like, this is a room of people who are working in animal management or welfare or running a rescue group or running a shelter or just really passionate about that. And we've got 3 pet owners that meet the requirements that I'm seeing all the time for adoptions, or the kind of things that we're being told are what is a responsible or good pet owner. So, hey, if we can't do it, then maybe it's unrealistic to expect the general public to be meeting all those things. And I just want you guys to consider that when you're thinking about your barriers to your reclaims. If you're judging those pet owners that are coming into your shelter, and they could be great homes, and that we really should be getting that pet home to them. Think about it with your adoptions too, if you're a rescue. Coming to the end, what are your barriers? I'd love you guys today, I've given you a few of the common ones, but every shelter, every area is going to have their own individual barriers. So I want you to have a think about what your barriers could be for your community to actually taking their pets home from you. Really good one is have your staff members survey the pet owners, not necessarily like I'm taking a survey and I'm going to write a thing down, but if they're talking to pet owners on the phone, ask questions if they're saying that they're having trouble. Ask questions about why and start actually noting it down and collating that data together to see what your specific issues are. Once you've got a really good idea of what your shelter's facing, work together to identify ways that you can actually minimise those barriers. Most importantly, and we've heard this already today, but track your data. What is it? You don't know what you don't know, but if you know it, you don't know it, or all of that stuff. You've got to track it. You've got to track your data and actually figure out what's going on. So look at your reclaim rate prior to actually, look at your reclaim rate. This is what it is. All right, we've identified our barriers. Here's how we're going to try and resolve them, and then actually track your reclaim rate. Is it going up? If not, you've got to reassess and think some more about how we're going to deal with that. Crunch the numbers. If pet owners are finding their pet at your shelter and they're not taking them home and they're saying to you it's because of a struggle with fees, it's really time to start figuring out whether requiring these high upfront fees in order to punish pet owners for letting their dogs escape. My dog's escaped. I think I'm a pretty good pet owner. So have a think about that. And obviously I know in local government money is a concern, but that's why I'm saying crunch your numbers, because I would say that for most of you it's actually probably not going to be cost effective to hold a pet for in Sydney or in New South Wales it's 14 days for a microchip pet, when if you could have sent it home on day 3, it's not cost effective. Lastly, prioritise your reclaims. For me, getting a pet home, I think, should be considered your number one best possible outcome for each animal that's come into your shelter. So adoption is there as a supplement if you can't get them home. And that's me. Thank you. I hope you guys can have a think about different ways that those things can be implemented for you and to get your reclaim rate up. You've got our info there. You can get us at info@teamdog.com.au. Sadly, I'm coming to the end of my time with Team Dog now, so I was going to say if you want to contact me directly, that's my email underneath. Thank you.
So I'll invite our speakers from the session up so we can have a Q&A, but I do have a very important announcement. There's some bad news, but there's some good news immediately following, so please don't panic when I start reading the note, because the end is good. Okay. For anyone parked in the car park on the up the ramp next door to the hotel, if you haven't paid and you have a fine on your windscreen, which apparently you will, you do not have to pay it, okay? So that's good, but you do need to bring it down to the hotel reception, who will scan it and give it to the car park owner, who will have it cancelled. However, if you plan to park here in the next few days of the conference, you do need to pay from now on. You can pay by machine halfway up the ramp for $5 if you come in before 10 a.m, or you can pay at the hotel reception before you leave today for $8 each day. You must have a receipt on your dashboard to avoid a fine from now on. So if anyone's parked, don't worry. It's all fixable so far, but not tomorrow. So yeah, if you'd like to come up, and if we have some questions for our speakers, if you want to start jumping on the mics, that would be great. And another thing I can mention is I should have thanked our sponsors after lunch, but I want to thank them now for making this event possible again. Yes.
Hi Melanie, I love some of your suggestions. Unfortunately, I am a council officer. We're often bound by, I love my job. That's not what I mean. The unfortunate bit is coming next. A lot of our policies and procedures are driven by management, where we don't actually have discretion to do a lot of the things that you've suggested, which would be great. Same with the council release fees, which are also not something we actually dictate. So
I know that. I understand that completely. It was the same for me. And I know that you guys at the coalface aren't necessarily going to be making those changes. But what I would say, if you're hearing these things today and thinking that they're valuable, and I know what management can be like. I know that it can be a long-term goal, but ideally that's what to me the ideal should be. And if you can go back and say, like, obviously, I'm hoping they've sent you here today rather than you have. I've done it before too. I've come of my own volition. But, you can go back and say, I've been to this is what's being talked about, this is what animal management is becoming now. And even if you can get one little thing, even if you can get that centre pay, that's why I talked about centre pay. For me, the ideal is waive the fees and just get the animal home. But I know what councils are like. If your council's already a centre pay council, it shouldn't be hard for maybe, if they're doing, you can argue, why are you doing it for your rates, but we're not doing it for our pet owning community to get their pets back home. So even if you could get your centre pay going, that would make a huge difference.
Definitely something I'm going to suss
do what you can, but I know what you like. I know what you're dealing with, trust me.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes? Did you hear that? Is F10 a quaternary ammonium compound?
You want to look at the label, and
we have some F10 people here.
yeah, so you want to look at the label. Usually it'll be ammonium at the end of it. So you want to research whatever you're using. A lot of these compounds have names, like I mentioned, accelerated hydrogen peroxide. We try to use the generic name, or Virkon is potassium peroxymonosulfate. Accelerated hydrogen peroxide is rescue. But it's always good to know the actual product that you're using and find out what kind of compound it is. But that is something that's really tricky. I remember when I was in private practice, I didn't know this. I learned a lot about disinfection when I went to a shelter medicine. And there's a product in the US called Parvusol. You would think Parvusol would kill parvo, but if you look it up, it doesn't. The research has shown over and over again that it does not. So the hard part is you can't trust the label for the disinfectants. I just don't feel fully confident because they've been shown not to be effective. So research whatever it is that you're using and make sure.
Kim.
Yeah, the accelerated oxygen is in Australia. There's a company, I think they're called Horse and Hound, and they call it Accel. And, you know, it actually comes as a shampoo that's really good for malassezia and stuff. We wash cats in it all the time. And it comes as a disinfectant strength.
Yeah, accelerated hydrogen peroxide, because it's a hydrogen peroxide derivative, is really safe. I did find it. I did some Googling in the session yesterday. Somebody mentioned, I think, Oxivir. It's the labeling issue, so I don't know what your regulations are here. Ours in the US are pretty strict in terms of what you can use, and everybody has to choose, you know, what you decide as far as what's labeled or not. But I did find that one online, Horse and Hound. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's a Canadian company that sends it here.
Yeah, exactly the same company probably that makes it in the US as well. It's a great product. So if you find that you can't use it and comply with regulations, then put pressure to get it approved through whatever channel is needed. Like public demand will help move those things through, but it really meets a lot of our preferred choices.
Yes.
Hi. This question is for Mark. With giving puppy owners advice to not walk their pups outside until fully vaccinated at 4 months plus 2 weeks, what impact is this having on their behavior, and what advice would be given?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And was that not your question? So, and the question was, if puppies are being withheld from being socialised in the greater community until, you know, potentially 18 weeks of age, has a good impact on their health. So there's two components to that. Behaviour, sorry, their behavioural health, that's what I meant to say. So there's two components to that. The first one is that they can absolutely still go to puppy preschool. So, and I think I said that in the talk, it doesn't stop puppies doing that socialisation. It's just that in the wider community, they're going to be at risk if parvo is in the parks, and you guarantee it, if you're having an outbreak, it's going to be in the park. So the other thing to consider, because I will get to the answer, I want to tell you the background first. The other thing to consider is that behaviourally, a lot of puppies don't have good experiences in the park. So if anything, puppies, and I can see nodding heads affirming that as well, a lot of puppies need to go to puppy preschool before they go to the park, because otherwise they're going to encounter their first big dog, or something can happen, they're going to hear a car, whatever, and they get scared and they remember that for life. So there's this misconception that puppies have to go to the park to socialise, and it's kind of like taking a toddler to somewhere really scary, you know, before they've learnt to cope with that kind of stuff. So what I would say is that absolutely, isolating them is not a good idea until 18 weeks of age, but socialising them in a controlled environment where they can learn what it's like, they can learn to, the behaviouralists talk about dogs learning to shake hands and say hello and goodbye and all that stuff that they need to learn, so that then when they do interact with other dogs later in life, they're not the little white fluffy dog that thinks it's big, that scares the big dog, that bites the white fluffy dog, that ends the white fluffy dog's life, that process that we go through. So absolutely, we do need to socialise them, but the park's not the safest reason for a lot of reasons. And people just need to understand and talk to their vets and go to puppy preschool and all those things. And hopefully that will also help in that whole scenario as well. But there is this misconception that, you know, you need to give a vaccination at 10 weeks that supposedly lasts for longer than 10 weeks that our data shows doesn't. You know, the last vaccination needs to be longer than that. We've got to socialise them before that. So they've got to be going to puppy preschool in these environments where they have had the environment adequately cleaned and where they can socialise appropriately and so on and so forth.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Oh, yes. I just wanted to ask, I agree, the park is the worst place behaviourally as well as medically for a puppy, but what about the concept of taking a puppy in your arms out in public so that they can see the world going on and people and noises and cars and everything, but not actually be on the ground? Is that okay?
So behaviourally, one of the concerns with, and people are smiling already, it's like you know what I'm going to say. A lot of dogs get used to being carried around, and it's also not a good thing to train them. If you want your dog to be a dog that gets carried around its whole life, that's okay. And you could do that, but at the same time, it's better if we teach the dog to be a dog from the start. So in theory, you could do that, But it's interesting, like dogs are so perceptive, they're used to our smells and our touch and all those things. And we don't want to encourage separation anxiety behaviours or this requirement to be carried around and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of things that we do as humans because it looks like a baby, you want to treat it like a baby. Dogs are not babies. You know, they're cute, but because we treat them in particular ways, we're responsible for encouraging a lot of behaviours, which are not wrong behaviours, but they're reacting to what we're doing. So I would say that in theory that could be okay, but in practice it probably wouldn't be the best way to do it. And to that end, personally, I think puppy preschool is a great environment that they can learn in, and I'd say that's a better way to do it. And the truth is that whilst those first 18 to 20 weeks are very formative in how they learn to behave, they learn a lot after that as well. So if we take them through the right channels for the first weeks or months, and then once they get to the age that they are more robust and strong both immunologically and behaviourally, well then they can go to other things as well.
We've got one more question.
This is for Mel. I'm Michelle from Camden Council. I'm the companion animal ranger there. And I just want to say we have taken a lot of Mel's ideas on board. We have increased our reclaim before they reach the pound by at least 50%, just doing proactive things, payment plans, things like that for our customers. We have reduced fees for animals going home. We've actually given them back to them, especially dogs that we know that are going to be difficult to rehome. It's easier to get them back than to wear those costs like Bill was talking about, because it is really, really hard. So it can be done. You can change management, get a great counsellor on board as well, and there's a lot that can be done.
And I can vouch for what Michelle and Camden are doing. It's absolutely fantastic. It's really, really great.